All right. Well, welcome everybody. This is the intermediate access with SQL Server Academy. As you know, every year I do beginners, intermediate, and advanced. And we did the beginners earlier this year in September, and then we skipped in October. We had a special guest from Microsoft. And now we're doing intermediate, and next month in December we'll do advanced. So several things to get to today. Let me just share my screen first. One of the things I've been doing is I've been enjoying my Disney Plus subscription just today, man. Just launched live, and I was playing with it earlier, and the amount of content this thing has. I went for the special. I prepaid for 3 years. At one point, a couple of weeks back, they had a buy 3 years, and you get you pay half the price. It was just unbelievable. I couldn't pass it up. And it's got everything. Like it's got the new Mandalorian, all these movies, and I've just been wasting my time away today watching some movies here and there. So I had never got around to seeing Double, so I'm looking forward to seeing that with my wife. She loves those kind of movies. Anyway, so I've been playing with that today. But it got me thinking, what is the database setup for a service like this, right? You have several transactions that occur. You have financial transactions, and then you've got member transactions, right? And so from a database perspective, what I do when I interview people is I give them a situation. One situation I like to quiz people when they interview with me is how would you design a database for a toll booth where you have one of those toll booths that require a transponder in your car, and the transponders are transparent. The ways those transponders work is they have a battery in them, and they use wireless signals with the transponder at the top of the toll booth to let you in, right? And so I asked somebody, okay, how would you design that database, and how would you go about designing the transactions involved? So that's a common interview scenario. Now, there's no right answer to that interview. I just want to see how the person uses their analytical skills to solve a problem. And it tells me a lot about them, how they approach a problem, how they structure it. And a lot of times, well, every time I do interviews over the phone because you're not going to find enough qualified access developers in Chicago that can be consultants, which is the distinguishment I like to make between hiring a developer and hiring a consultant. If you guys don't mind muting your microphone, that'd be great because I'm getting some. I'm muted towards the end of the meeting for questions. So yeah, and Klaus, welcome by the way. Ron, thank you for joining us. So one of the things that I might do in the future is, okay, if you were the architect for Disney Plus, how would you go about architecting just the act of signing in to the service, right? There's so many other things involved with this service. And I tried logging in earlier today. It launched today. I tried logging in earlier today. I wasn't able to launch. So they apparently made some adjustments with their capacity, right? But it's important to me that when I hire somebody, um, they are a consultant, not a developer, right? And so the distinction between a developer and a consultant is a consultant to me can interface directly with the client, be able to answer that client's questions and be able to understand the business problem and be able to translate their understand that business problem into a solution. That's a consultant. And sometimes, people just can't break that mold. They're always developers. You can't make the transition to consulting. I remember once I had a particular individual on my staff who Nero was able to breach that into becoming a consultant, and we were with a client, and the client was explaining how the system worked, and one of the comments was, he just blurted this out. God, I wanted to kill him. He just blurted out, well, that's stupid. I turned to him, and I turned to the client, and I have got this face of shock on me. I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you just said that. That's stupid. They're talking about a client system. So anyway, I thought that was inappropriate and extreme, and I told him, okay, look, if you don't know the answer, Don't tell the client you don't know, but rather I'll research and get back to you. So you want to reply back with an action plan and not a sentiment or something like that, right? You want to be able to demonstrate to the client. Clients are not dumb. They know that you're not going to know everything. So you want to reply back in a way. So don't say it's stupid, but rather, it requires architectural engineering, re-engineering, and so forth. So I mentioned that because the fact that I've been hiring lately, and I'm growing. The firm is growing through our advertising and marketing efforts. We're even now getting clients in Europe. Europe is a challenge for us because of the time difference, right? Right now, people in Europe at Carl, it's like 1 or 2 in the morning there. And I always appreciate Carl joining us for these meetings, but he makes an extra effort to stay up and join us. So how do you go about servicing them? So it's hard for me to service clients outside the U.S. And if they're a potential client in Latin America, then there's economics involved. If it's in Canada, not so much. But Europe, it's hard. It's hard to service the account over there, and that make it easy. I'm up for the client says, look, we're not going to be waking up at 3 in the morning to answer your calls. If this is something that you can't deal with, then we may have to refer you to somebody in Europe who can take care of you. All right. So last in October when we first did this, right, we talked about the fundamentals. And the number one thing I always stress when you're going to convert Access to SQL Server project is solve the access issues first before you migrate, because they might get even bigger once you migrate to SQL Server. I'll give you a good example of that. So if you already have a form that's loading really slow, or process and access that's rolling real slow, it might even be slower in SQL Server. And so it's important that you fix any performance issues with Access to begin with. Now, obviously, if you have 25 people in an Access system, it's not going to be optimized, right? So when I'm talking about these problems, I'm talking when there's 1 or 2 people logged in. Maybe the backend file is on a local PC or in a backend network. And maybe the reason it's slow is because doesn't have any primary keys. And I see this all the time. Tables don't have any primary keys, they don't have any secondary keys. It's not well architected, right? So you want to address those issues first before you consider using SQL Server. And from there, I gotta sit down. I've been standing all day. So you want to be able to do that. And so today we're going to talk about intermediate. Today we're going to talk about views, creating views, linking them to your SQL Server front end. Several issues you're going to come across with views. We're going to talk a little bit about how SQL Server Management Studio works from a SQL Access guy's perspective, right? We're going to do a little bit of a deep dive with SQL Server Management Studio today and talk about views. Now, SQL Server Management Studio, I logged in already to this, and you should be able to see my screen. If you don't, let me know. See if I got comments. I need to have the comment window up so you guys can leave me comments during the presentation. All right, Ben, thank you very, very much, Ben Sackrick. I probably murdered your last name there, Ben. Sorry about that. Ben is a good friend of mine. He's joined us in the meeting. Thank you very much. So when it comes to SQL Server Management, first of all, I want to let you know that this journey you're about to undertake, if you haven't done it already, is going to be very pleasant. The tool set that you're going to be using with SQL Server are absolutely first rate compared to what we have in the Visual Basic IDE for Access, right? And so you're going to love it. So I already logged in. When you log in, you're going to see a series of databases next to the plus sign. The first thing that you need to deal with when we do the SQL Server Management Studio installation, by the way, I'm on 18.4, which is the latest version, is that you need to deal with what we call the security surface in SQL Server. When SQL Server first installs, Microsoft installs it with the tightest security settings possible. What does that mean? It means that you're not going to be able to access SQL Server across the network, right? So if you're, for example, if I install it on my local PC, that's not a big issue. I have, for example, the SQL Server Development Edition, which I encourage you to work with as opposed to Express. But the Development Edition is free. And I don't need to be connected over network, so I never configured this for network access. But I've been there with a client that's installed SQL Server Express, which is free, and we need to modify the security settings in order to get it to work so that other people can access the database on other computers on the network. And you do that not through SQL Server Management Studio, but rather through SQL Server Configuration Manager. Let's see, Configuration Manager. Let me bring this up. SQL Server Configuration Manager. Why is this not coming up? Configuration web results. SQL Server Configuration Manager is what we use to be able to do that. And why is it not showing up on my computer? I thought I had it installed. I like just pressing the window key, start typing. That's my favorite thing there. Let's see. Slack. Your phone. No, these are apps. This is not the same thing as programs. Let's do it this way. Go to the assets. Microsoft, SQL Server 2017, SQL Server 2018. So SQL Server Management Studio is what I got now. Everything to Wizard. It's not it. Microsoft SQL Server 2017. I just installed 18 SSMS, and I had SQL Server 2017. I just version 17 uninstalled. Anyone knows this thing makes me look bad. SQL Server Configuration Manager. Let's just type Configuration Manager. System configuration. Let's just type SQL Server. SQL Server Management Studio app, profiler, apps. I don't think that's going to be there. Let's see. Installation Center, import and export. Okay. Installation Center. I don't think that's it. May have changed it, but let's see. Yeah, that's not it.
Sorry, I don't think that the config manager is part of the installation. You have to put your own shortcut on anywhere, I think.
I think it should be on the, I have to create a shortcut. Is that what you're saying? All right. Thanks, Carl. Appreciate it. So one of the things that you need to, all right, thank you. Somebody just gave me Klaus. That's you, Carl. Klaus, not Carl. I keep calling you Carl. It's Klaus. See if I can. He just pasted it in here for me. All right. Microsoft Management Console. Thank you so much. All right. Whew. Klaus to the rescue. If you have tools in SQL Server which you don't have in Access. Klaus, what do you mean by that? One single but to fixing in Access if you have tools in SQL which you don't have in Access and have in Access. Mention that in the comments. Can you elaborate about that?
Oh, I've done some procedures in SQL Server which I don't have in Access. I know if some people have problems there, I fix it in SQL Server directly.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. All right. So when you launch this, there's several things on this menu. SQL Server Services is the actual server running right now. I have this server running on my machine. Obviously, if this is running, if you run it on the same machine that SQL Server is installed, you'll have it pop up easily. If not, you'll have to look for it. But right now, this is running. So right here, I can right-click on this. I can pause my SQL Server. I can stop it. I can restart it. And we'll need to restart it later on once you make some configuration changes. SQL Server Agent is always going
to... For starting and stopping, you don't need. You can do just on right-click on here.
Yeah, so you can right-click here on the SQL Server to stop and restart and start it up again.
Yeah, I mean, you can do it in SSMS as well.
Yes, you can. You can do it there too. Yes. SQL Server Agent is stopped. If there were a job running right now, it would be running, right? So the SQL Server Agent is mostly going to be stopped all the time. SQL Server Browser is something that by default I have Microsoft may have suggested you have it turned off. All that means is it allows people on the network to easily find your SQL Server, which there's different schools of thoughts there. Again, I'm not a SQL Server expert. I'm an expert on access with SQL Server. You would consult with your client or your SQL Server or IT, your client's IT department to decide whether you want to run the browser or not. It does allow for easy find of SQL Server in your browser. All right, and then you'll notice that there are several configurations here. SQL Server configuration 32-bit, client 11 32-bit, SQL Server network configuration 64-bit, and SQL Server Native Client 11 configuration 64-bit. Now I'm going to start with the protocol SQL Server, and this is where you open things up with the TCP/IP settings. So here you would come into TCP/IP, click on IP addresses, and notice I have all of mine's yes to open it yes. And so usually what I do is I open it up all the yes, and then I start closing them off. And all this means is you have on a modern PC multiple IP addresses. You have the old style IP address of 192.168, right? Or a Big Ten network, it would be 10 dot something something nothing, or the other. And then you have what they call the IP address, a modern IP address, which is a lot more complex that most network cards have because people, the world is running out of IP addresses, so they came up with a much longer IP address scheme. And that's what this configuration has here. There's a name for that, and right now it's escaping me what kind of IP addresses these are. But you would then double click here and click it to yes if it was no, and enable that yes or no. Now the port number, right now I set it to a standard 1433 port. And so if you don't want a standard 1434, you want dynamic ports, which is what you'll see on a new install, it'll be set to 0. All that means is the port will change dynamically. Hence, the SQL Server browsing service will permit you to find that server if it's a dynamic port change. I set mine to 1433 just to configure it. So your first challenge is not so much to get SQL Server to work with Access, but doing what we call, again, the surface configuration, the security surface configuration Microsoft SQL Server allow you to connect from another PC. So you would do this on the server, you install it, or the PC where you install it. Then you would go to the other PC and you try creating a DSN. And if you can connect with that SQL Server or DSN on another PC, you know that it's not a issue with Access when you can't connect with Access, right? So you want to rule out any problems with SQL Server. All right. Client 11 is something that a lot of people are still using, but we recommend client ODBC client 17 or LadyB client 18 for the latest and greatest SQL Server. Okay, so once you've configured your SQL Server and you're ready to start using SQL Server Management Studio, you connect to SQL Server Management Studio and that server, and you'll see the list of databases here. And you'll notice there's a separate security option. Now, if you installed SQL Server, you had two options, right? Remember, you installed it with network domain credentials or with SQL Server Security. If you did with SQL Server Security, most likely you entered the SQL Server admin password for that when you install it. If you didn't install it and you're using somebody else's, they need to add you via the logins here, right? So somebody's got to come in here and add you via a login so you can then access the server as a developer. So 9 times out of 10, my clients have SQL Server installed. They have to add me to their SQL Server, so they created an Active Directory account for me, and with that, I log in to that SQL Server there. When it comes use UTF-8 with SQL Server, SQL 19, then you need the newest drivers. Okay, yeah, so Klaus is making some good comment there in the comment section about SQL Server 2019, which just released this week, I believe. All right, haven't had a chance to play with you SQL Server 19, but I do encourage you to look into it because the self-management features are simply just amazing. It'll optimize views and tables and queries on the fly. You can take advantage of these features by using Azure services. And so next month, when we go into advanced, we'll be talking about how to leverage Azure services with SQL Server Microsoft Access, pitfalls, and issues you need to work around there with that. All right, so you add yourself to the login. Now you're ready to create the database, and we use SQL Server Migration Assistant to create these databases last time, and we call this one SQL Server Academy, which I believe is just the Twin tables here. that was one of the tables. Doesn't really matter. So one of the things that I like doing is I'm a keyboard warrior. So throughout this presentation, I'm gonna give you some keyboard shortcuts. The first one I love is Control N for new. Keep in mind, everything you deal with SQL Server, you can do via what they call T-SQL or SQL Server DDL commands, data definition language, which means that if I know the right syntax, I can create a table, I can add a column to an existing table, I can do table management, I can create views with DDL, right? I can drop tables, I can drop views. So for example, I can say create view W test. VW has too many tests. As select star file. Of course, you wouldn't create a view like this necessarily, but I'm just testing it, right, from orders. A couple of things you'll notice at the very top, you can check the syntax right here, checking the syntax, everything is okay. You want to execute this, it creates that view. If I execute it again, it's going to give you an error message because, of course, the view has been created. You come over here to views, you're not going, you may not necessarily see it unless you refresh it. But in this case, you did see, I do see it. But if you click on right click on refresh, you'll be able to see that view. So this is DDL, and or some people may even argue that's maybe T-SQL. To me, it's more like DDL on creating an object. T-SQL is what we do with the select. Now, everything in SQL Server is a query. So, for example, I want to query the server for the version of the server that I'm connected to. I can do version. And I can do execute that, and it'll come back with the version of SQL Server, which I can expand about to get the everything information. You could query the objects in the SQL Server, the databases, the tables, and so forth. And there's a lot of great SQL code out there that lets you do that. But just keep in mind that you can probably do everything via T-SQL as opposed to using the commands. Once you install SQL Server Management Recreation Assistant, or SQL Server Management Studio, excuse me, very first thing I do is I go to Tools and then Options. And here I go to my designers. And I uncheck the setting here where it says prevent saving changes that requires. Now I just installed SSMS 18, so I'm gonna check this. I don't like this. One of the things, neat ways I learned T-SQL is with the other generate change scripts. We'll test that set next now. I'm gonna click OK. If you don't have this unchecked, every time you want to change a table, it won't let you save it. Those changes to the table becomes quite annoying. So I always do the uncheck that. All right, great. So let's go ahead and do this. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna right click on customers. Click the design view. Let's try that automatically generate SQL Server code when you make a table change. So I'm just gonna say test column here. And I'm just gonna pick that and I'm just gonna save it. When I click on save, it generates this code for me, which I can then copy. Automatically generate script on each server, right? I want to save this. I'm gonna say yes. We'll take a look at this in a second here. And my wife just walked in, so that's what you're hearing in the background. So I'm gonna just say customer SQL. Save that. Yeah, I'm on the phone here with a worldwide audience. Say hi. Okay, she can't hear me. Thank God. All right, documents. Yeah, I'm on the phone. All right. The Puerto Rican. What we call it around here, Puerto Rican intercom. All right, so I'm gonna click on save there, and now I've saved this table. There's no star next to it. And let's go ahead and take a look at that code. So I'm gonna do Control O. I'll go to my documents here, and my documents, and I'm gonna go by modified, and let's see, one customers, type customers. So just by the fact of adding that column to the table, you'll notice that you can do this via T-SQL. Remember I told you can do it via T-SQL. You can auto table, customers, add, right? So I could just type this out in the SQL query window, and it would work just as fine. It's just a wonderful way of how I did that. And then the next second part is you need to do the lock escalation on there as well. And then you could use the commit to commit that. And of course, this part here, I guess you have to, you would execute all of this. The begin transaction is always a good is always a good methodology when you're doing, for example, store procedure. We'll be talking more about that next month. You want to wrap your statements in a transaction batch, so if something fails, the whole thing fails. A good example of that is, let's go back to the toll booth example, right? You have a car pulling into a toll booth. What is the transaction that occurs for that car to go through the toll booth? Well, first, we need to check to see if the car has a valid account, right? That's the first transaction. Does the car have a valid transaction? That's not so much a transaction, but do a good lookup. Then we need to deduct from that car's account if they have enough funds in that transaction, that account. For it's a valid account, does it have enough funds for the transaction? If it has enough funds for the transaction, then I need to deduct the cost of the transaction, $1.50, 35 cents, whatever the cost of the toll is, from their account, and then deposit that money, right? Credit that money into the toll booth's account. Let me just close the door here. Be right back. So if you're designing that transaction, you're wrapping the several transactions. You're going to debit one account, credit the other. If you fail on one side of that, in other words, it fails from it took it out of my account, but then it failed in posting that for whatever reason to the toll booth's account, then you want to reject the whole thing and not commit it. That's a good example of begin transaction and commit. Be able to do that. Now, a technique a lot of developers have is that when they like to do when they're doing testing database, they'll begin a transaction, and then instead of doing it, they'll uncheck this commit. They'll comment it out, and basically for their session, the tables have changed, but for everybody else in the database, it hasn't. So, if, for example, if you do an update, I want to update the pricing of all my items by 10%. You do the update, it hasn't committed those transactions yet. You can then roll it back if your SQL syntax is wrong or you have problems with the query, you have to redo it. Then once you did the commit, it allows you to do that. Just a wonderful way of being able to check your stuff. Of course, you probably wouldn't be checking your SQL code to a production database anyway. Probably using a beta database for that, but a lot of people like to program with the begin transaction and then have this commit uncommented, and then they could just do that or roll back. So when it comes to this management studio, I love the Intellisense, and so I just want to show you something. I just added a column to customers, right? Test called test. So for example, if I come in here and I say from customers, and then I start typing the column, right? So we have a customer. Let me just see what customer fields are here. Columns. So I got company, the column. So if I start typing company, it'll float to the top. If I can type company, here we go. So company is a valid field. The field I just added is called test. So I do comma test. It so happens in this case, it did do the IntelliSense. If it does not do the IntelliSense, you want to do Shift Control R, right, for that. Now, if I execute this, now remember I'm a keyboard warrior, so I'm going to press F5, or I can hit the SQ button here. So I'm going to press F5, I get our results. Company A. Sometimes you have a long query, a long stored procedure. You want to get rid of this window down here. You press Control R, it goes away. R brings it back, Control R, it goes away. Now you have two tabs here. You got the results of the SQL syntax and the messages. So now it tells you how many rows were returned back from that select query. If you're doing an action query, update, delete, query, insert, you're going to get this 29 rows affected. You're not going to get the results back, right? It just tells you it inserted 29 rows or deleted 21 rows. It doesn't give you the results. The results is when you do a select query now. All right, so IntelliSense is just a wonderful way of doing this. One of the things that you'll notice also is you can drag columns from that table to the company where to the query window here. So I can just drag this table here, and notice that the field name has a space. So automatically surrounds it in bracket. And now if I press F5, give me give me that. Okay, great. I'm glad you like that, Greg. What part of it that you liked did you say, well, great? All right. So when you do something like this, you can have. Here's the difference with Access. So I wish Access be able to have these features, right? And that's something I may have comment towards the end of the presentation. I can initiate a second query here, right? Okay, so I'm gonna say select star from employees. 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 Microsoft and their bad naming conventions. All right. Now, if I press F5, how many queries is it going to execute? It's going to execute both queries. It's going to execute the first one and the second one. If I only want to select employees, if I do select employees and press F5, in other words, I highlight the second query, press F5, I only execute one, right? The same thing with the other one. If I execute the first one, or do that. So it's just a wonderful way of being able to run multiple queries at the same time. I don't have to do Control N. I don't have to start a new query window. If I click here on messages, I see the results from both queries here. That's a wonderful way. One of the first things you're going to be doing is you're going to be commenting on stuff or creating comments. Something you cannot do in an Access query. So if I want to comment something out, I got two options. I can do this dash dash to select that comment, right? Or I can just come in here and say this is a comment. So if I want to comment my queries. And when I save this, if I'm creating a view, it'll save it with the comments in the view, which is pretty neat. All right, so another way to create comments is with if you have a long list of codes. In Access, when we want to do comments, we do single quote, right? But here you can comment a lot more larger blocks of code by doing /* and then the star / or star /. So that's a long comment. So you can have long comment blocks here. You do this // So it's that way you don't have to do dash dash for every line. It's just much more convenient. So, I mean, that's just a little bit. And what's going to happen is as you learn this stuff, SQL Server Management, you're going to realize two things. Number one, you realize how behind Access is when it comes to the programming environment and how Microsoft is really, what really infuriates me is how Microsoft can do so good with SQL Server Management Studio is completely neglect the Visual Basic Integrated Development Environment, or IDE for short. I mean, that thing hasn't been updated and never. And as an Access MVP, I get to go every year. They just registered for next summit in March. Today was the first day for registration. And I get to meet the powers of be at Microsoft headquarters. And this is one of our biggest beefs where we talk about the ID hasn't seen any love whatsoever when it comes to doing the kind of things I just demonstrated here now. Especially, you're probably going to get stuff in the IDE for Outlook, Excel, or Word before you get anything from Word for Access, right? So, for example, the ability to be able to say select star from employees, select from employees and then start picking fields and have them show up. That would be wonderful if we can do that for Access. Never going to happen, in my opinion. They're not going to make that investment. It would have been wonderful to see that. So it's frustrating for me that I know they can do it, but they don't take the time to do it. In terms of how easy this is, how nice it works. The ID. Hey, Klaus, thank you very much for talking about that book. No, I haven't listened. I have not read in that book, SQLDownUnder.com. Gbook Access SQL Editor. So, Klaus, do you like that as Access SQL Editor? You're the second person to talk to me about that. You like that editor versus the one that comes in with the Access?
Oh, yes, quite a lot, especially because he has the Pureman's SQL formatter, and you can do with two mouse clicks do a format so that you can read the query, at least for documentation. So can I just used that tool the whole afternoon because I had to to comment some queries out, and that was great.
So this is integrated right into the IDE and Access.
When you have bought it, yes.
Okay. Are
It's
you
great, absolutely great.
okay? Well, you know what? I've never looked at that. Ben, have you seen this before? Ben has taught me a lot about Access over the years. He's on the cutting edge. He's actually developed his own tools, Access. I don't know if Ben's still with us. Yes, he is. And Ben has created a tool that converts Access SQL to SQL Server SQL, which we'll get to it next month. And when we talk about that portion, and next month I want to show it to you. So you install this, and oh, it's only $10. Wow, that's great. While we do the trial here, I wonder if Ben Cloutier has used this. Ben is really big on tools. Let me ask him about that. Thank you, Klaus, for showing this to me.
Okay.
I thought you would retire, Klaus.
I can't. I have to earn money.
Are you an independent consultant in Germany?
Yes.
Okay. Are you looking for
Last.
clients? If I can't take care of that UK client, to be able to take care of them?
Of course, yes.
Oh,
I
perfect.
asked you some 2 or 3 years ago. I even asked you for working for you, but I was too expensive.
Yeah. Well, there's just challenges where we need you to work at Chicago hours, at least overlap a significant amount of hours. That's one of the reasons why I can't sometimes work with people in India because it's so the hours are just unreal.
I don't have, as you see, I don't have too much problems with that.
Yeah, you don't. All right. So when it comes to
It's 2 o'clock in the night at the moment.
2 o'clock, oh my gosh, Klaus, yeah, I really do appreciate you spending time with us. All right, so one of the nice things about this is now I can press Control N. I can have multiple query windows, right? So I can have multiple aspects, multiple business. Now, obviously, if you have to be prescient about database you have. Now, a lot of times, Klaus and Ben and I, when we're developing solutions, we have multiple versions of the database. We have the production version, then we have the beta version, and may even have a test version. And so you'll notice here when I click here, it's set to the database I imported in October. So any queries I execute in this window are going to be against this database. So you have to be especially careful when you write code, especially you don't want to do a test and update query in production when you're really in. Yeah. Now, one way around that is to use the use command, right? So for example, if I say use Server Academy, no matter what it says up here, right, no matter what it says, so I'll switch this over to the master database, which I'll talk about in a second. Then I do the select start, right, from customers. It knows where to get it.
I haven't tried it, but the book I described from Greg, he describes an option to have different colors depending on which version of the SQL Server you are, or on which, if production, then it's red, and if it's test, it's green, and so on.
That's a free book, right? Start
Yes, you
here.
can download it.
Is this one? This one, the SMS Tips and Trick book?
Yes,
Oh, that's great. So that's at SQL Down Under, SQLDownUnder.com. Thank you, Klaus, for that.
and his tools are great as well.
Okay. So we'll notice that I've
Free.
commented the. Oh, Greg says he's watched some of the goods. He's really good. Okay, Greg, thanks for that feedback. So notice I comment out the, you know, if there's anybody here who's really intermediate, because I appreciate you guys showing up. But when you're teaching the instructor stuff new, you kind of wonder if you guys are all intermediate. But I appreciate you showing up and helping me out every month. I really do. All right. So All right, so Ben just responded back to me that he has used it but hasn't bought a license. All right, only $10. All right, use Slack internally to communicate. That's a problem. He says that the problem with this is that it uses metadata, and if you have it in your environment, then when you go switch it to a client environment, it might cause problems. That's a good reason why we haven't used it. You know, the problem with this, and the problem we have when we develop is we cannot customize the environment too much because it ends up creating compatibility problems with our client. And so that's why I love Ben's tools, Ben Sacker's tools, and looking forward to demoing some of that next month if he lets me, authorize me to do that. All right, so I use the use command basically, right? If you don't know it, the master database. This is something I need to mention. This is a typical rookie mistake when you back up your database. When you do backups, so keep in mind SQL Server Express does not come with automated backup tools. You need to manually right-click on the database and click the task, and then back up the database. And that's really important because you don't want to lose your work if you don't have a lot of information on that. But most people will back up their database and neglect to back up the master database and user database as well. And it's really important that you do that, right? So if I click here, I have several databases. I got the master model, MSDB, and the TempDB. So I always recommend backing up the master of the model as well as your production databases on here. So if you're not careful, if you only back up the database and then you restore it to the server, right? You may have some security issues with that because you didn't back up the master database, which has all the user accounts and so forth on there. Now, for SQL Server Express, we talked about this, I believe, in October. We recommend SQL Backup and FTP, which is a product that's very inexpensive, less than $100. It's called SQL Backup and FTP. I want to look that up if you have clients with the SQL Server Express, which in my case is most of them. Right? Most we're dealing with small businesses. Let's face it, if they're using an Access database, they're not going to be a multinational computer, multinational company. For the most part, they're mostly mom and pop databases. So oftentimes our customers are exposed to SQL Server for the first time when we come in and we do the work with them. And they know they need or they heard that they need to go to SQL Server, and we guide them through that process. And we never we never ask anybody to purchase a license for SQL Server if we can get away with it with SQL Server Express. It's just not worth it in my case to tell my small business customers spend thousands of dollars for SQL Server. SQL Server Express is just as fine. All right, so Shift Control R. Remember, don't forget about that. Update your Intellisense. Control N to open new windows, and the use command to force it to a particular database. Now, one of the very first things I did when I started developing a SQL Server is I started using the query editor because it was so familiar to me. And it really made me easy to transition over to SQL Server Management Studio. I'll give you an example of that. If I select this query here, I right click on this query, and I select Design Query and Editor, I get the very simple interface that I'm so used to with Access. And here I can right click, add another table, and employee privileges maybe, and they're linked automatically. Now I can resize this. So I'm familiar with this, right? Somewhat familiar. So I have this here, but what I like about this compared to Microsoft Access is I have this SQL statement down here. So notice that as when I added this table, it modified this. So I can come in here and I can add a where clause manually where employee privileges There's a problem with using a space in your table names. Privileges. Dot employee ID. So if I come out here, it recognized that as valid, which is good. And if I come down here, notice that it had a filter, right? So here is called filter in the QBE. This is what called query by example. That's the only name I know it. I borrowed that QBE from Paradox for when I was a Paradox developer. So here, I could have just easily come in here and done this right here as well, right? So if I delete it from here, it's gone from the SQL statement. If I click on it up here, it's back, and then I can add the filter here equal 1, right? Equal 1.
One additional nice thing is the automatic field names. If you type a star, then it expands automatically to the field names.
Where would I type star? What part of this here?
Yeah, I mean, you just printed your original was in a select star, but
Yes.
if you use the query designer, you get a select blah 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 blah.
Ah, okay, yes, that's what happened here. Carl, great point. So because I said select star for employees, when I go into query SQL design, it broke that out into every field in that table. Now, when I click on OK, now notice that it shows every. So I went from a select star to selecting every field. That's what Klaus was saying. So if you need to pick every field in that table, you don't want to use select star, you can just do select star and then do query by example, the query editor, and it'll bring back all the fields on there. So thank you very much for that. Notice that it prefaced now I'm gonna go ahead and modify this. A couple of things. First of all, I don't like the full table names here, so I'm gonna come in here and I'm gonna say from employees E, I'll name this right E, and then employee privileges P. You have to put the S in there, SP. See, and I click over here. Notice that the table names automatically up here are changed to E and P. When I click on OK, it's much more readable format, right? It's much more condensed here. So it's I learn SQL syntax by looking at as it's generated in that query design editor, as opposed to writing all this T-SQL code from scratch, which that's why I often find myself doing now. After many years of using SQL Server, I find it easier just to type it than to launch the query design editor, add the tables, do the lines, pick the fields, especially if they're short queries. It's just easier for me to do that.
Always use the right click on the table with the select thousand something and delete the top 1,000.
Yeah, so let's talk about that, right? So one of the things that you can do here is when you run the right click on the table, you can go here and you have the ability to be able to pick the table, of course, first. Yeah, pick the table. So I go back to table view. Here, when I right click on a table, I have a select, right, to a new query editor window or to a file or to the clipboard. All I do here is just like to here, it just right to this basic design query select statement here, and I can execute that, and it brings back every record. Klaus was talking about if it's a larger table, it might say select 1,000, first 1,000 records. And from here, you can just edit the SQL syntax. So you want to explore the ability. Now, one of the things that we like to do, especially when it comes to views, is we like to right click here and script view as alter to new query window. Nice thing about alter is then I can modify the view, right? Where, see here, order date, right? Less than today's date. Right. So now I've added this view here, and I can then execute this and modifies the view with that. So it's just a nice way of being able to quickly load the view, make your changes, and when you execute it, load this. Now, if you need to run this inside the query window, you select that and then just press F5, and then you get the results, right? So if you want to see the results before you create the view, or alter the view, you can do it as well. Just a handy way of being able to manage views that way. All right, so once you created views, you would then use your table linking strategy. I use the SN list linking because that way I don't have to go to every computer, create the SN, and it just makes my life a lot easier. I'm not going to go into a whole discussion of the SN list. There's lots of articles on the web. I even wrote a 3-part series on my blog about the SN list. And when IoT Impact, when we use our DSN list technology, we drive that linking with a table in SQL Server, and I mentioned that in the blog post. So to learn more about that, go to accessexperts.com/start here. And it's part of the collection of blog posts I recommend anybody starting with SQL Server. But when you link it to Microsoft Access front end, it looks like another table in Access. And one of the major drawbacks to using a view as a source for a form is out of the box, it won't let you edit that view. In fact, Access won't let you edit any SQL Server table unless it has an index on it, primary key on it. So if you were to link a SQL Server table to Access front end that doesn't have a primary key, you won't be able to edit data of it. Now, view by definition in SQL Server does not have a primary index on there or any index on there that's deterministic because views by their nature can be non-deterministic. I'm not going to get to that discussion. Basically, what I recommend is I wrote a post on how to add index to a view in Access, right? So there's 2 steps involved. Let's say, for example, I create this view on orders, right? And for whatever reason, I want to use this view as the record source on a form. So I create the view in SQL Server. I then link it to the Access front end. And then I run code in the VBA window to create an index on that view. And now the data is editable. Now, a couple of caveats about that. Number one, thanks, Greg, for linking my blog post there. Number one is you will run across a view in your lifetime that's got lots of tables, and SQL Server doesn't know which table you want to edit, delete, or insert into. And this has happened only a handful of times for me. Yeah, so you guessed it, I wrote a blog post on that. But basically, what it boils down to is, I'm not going to get into all the details now. You have to create a trigger on the view, an insert trigger or delete trigger, an update trigger, wherever the case may be. Because SQL Server, you may have 10 tables in a view. SQL's like, okay, I know you're trying to delete this record, but I don't know which table you want me to delete it from. And it just throws an error up. And you'll see that during development. The way you get around that is to do a delete trigger, for example, or an insert trigger. All right, and so when it comes to views, Microsoft Access thinks it's another table. I'm working on a project with a client that has a very large Access database that we're converting to SQL Server. And it has literally hundreds of queries in it. And when we create a view in that instance, because we don't know, all right, let me say, because we had to migrate the query to a view in SQL Server, we need to keep the name and Access is the same name as the old query. Right. So this, for example, the client has a query called QRY hex. And he uses this query everywhere in his application. Forms, reports, other queries, you name it. Well, usually when we create a view, as you saw, I used the VW here in front of it, right here, to designate that view. Well, if I can do view VW hex in the front end, but now I got to go into every table, every form, every report, and modify that. And I'm just not going to do that. So in that case, what we did was we kept the original access query name. So when we link it back to the front end, you don't have to use VW, right? You can have it as VW in the query, but then use the original access name in Microsoft Access. For simplicity's sake, I just keep it both the same, both on the server and on the access front end. You can name a view any name you want in Access when you link to it. And sometimes that can be advantageous. All right, now, when you create a view in Access, excuse me, SQL Server, you want to make sure this view is optimized. I mean, one of the reasons that we create views to begin with is because it's faster to create a view. I mean, the performance out of it is much faster than using regular access query. And you're going to find this a lot. You're going to find that a view is almost always going to be faster and results back with access. Why? Because even though the ODBC driver that you're using, or client 11, whatever your preferred method is optimized to use with SQL Server, and it's supposed to send that code to SQL Server, that query SQL Server, and get that the SQL Server handle the query, return the results. There are instances where SQL Server gives up and just sends all the data to Access, and then Access is the one that does the query. A view forces it to always be in SQL Server. So that's number one. Number two, I can come in here and I can do Control L, analyze this query execution plan. I can then tweak the execution plan. I can then see if there's any missing indexes or recommended indexes that are needed, create those. But more importantly, time Access runs this view. Every time this view is executed on the SQL Server, if SQL Server is smart enough to see if this query is used often, it'll keep that view in memory. And by keeping that view in memory, the execution plan in memory is a lot faster. So SQL Server is constantly moving things in and out of memory. A query that's in memory is going to run a lot faster than a query on a hard drive, right? So you want to be able to, if you have a very popular view, you want to create that. Sometimes I have customers or developers that create a pass-through query, which would also be similar to a view, but the problem with the pass-through query is not saved in SQL Server. The pass-through query, by definition, is something that's like me opening a window here and just typing SQL code. If you really create a pass-through query, that's all great and everything, and it's going to run on SQL Server over time, but SQL Server may not cache that view. And therefore, you got to keep that in mind that if you're going to be using something a lot, you're better off just running it. That's number one. Number two, you get statistics over time. As that query is executed, and then a SQL Server expert may come along after a while of using a database, and suggest additional indexes based on the statistics and running this, right? So there's all kinds of reasons why you want to use views with your SQL Server front end, with your Microsoft Access front end. That's going to help you tremendously when it comes to the performance. Okay, any questions regarding views or SQL Server Management Studio? My advice about using both of them. All right, so we're going to open it up. You have any general questions on SQL Server Access? Yeah.
I
Yes.
have a question.
Yes, ma'am. How can I help you?
Okay, so like you said about when you're creating a view to replace a query, keeping the same name,
Yes.
references to objects on forms, you'd have to rename them differently, wouldn't you? So that then you can create the access query with the view referencing so it's going to say where, say, ID equal. So say if you've got a form, that you're looking at a list of products, and it has an ID, and you want this query that's for a subform is matching up on the value of a text field.
All right, so the subform is using the view, right? The subform is using the view on the form, right? And then it's matching with a text box on the main form.
Yes.
All right, so for those of you who don't know, you have an access form. You can actually link a text box on the main form with a subform. And the reason you would do that is to sync it, right? So where you put in that text box,
yes.
it's going to sync with that in the subform.
Yeah. Okay, so what about if it's a list box?
All right, so if it's a list box, it's going to sync every time you select an item on the list box with the subform.
No, sorry, no. If and the list box is linked to the main form by the ID.
Okay, so the list box on the subform.
No, it's not a subform, just a list box on the.
Oh, it's the list box. Okay.
Yep.
The list box is using a view and it's syncing with a text box on the main form.
Yes.
Okay. And what issues have you come across with that setup? What issues you're having with that setup?
No, it's just that because you said about renaming your query, creating your views with the same name as the query.
Uh-huh.
You need to. You bring the view in, but the view then has to be in an access query, doesn't it?
All right. So
Filter on the text box.
okay. So all right. I see what you're going with this. So notice here that I have a where clause, right? Well, what if the where clause here says where customer ID, right? Customer ID equal 100. Well, this is useless view, right? Because I'm always forcing it to customer ID equal 100. Now, I've seen instances of this where you have a multi-tenant database, where you have multiple businesses in a database, and maybe you have a specific view for a partial database, right? But this case, there's not multi-tenant. And so this would be useless. You wouldn't create a view for that. But an Access developer will have code like that, and they would modify the code of the query on the fly. Well, you can't modify the code of the query of view on the fly. You're not going to drop the, okay, here's what you have to do, right? If you wanted to do that, you would have to drop the view in SQL Server, create a new view or alter the view with the new filter. Then you have to relink it or refresh the Access database. That's just too much work. So what this young lady is saying is that you would create a new Access query that's based on the view, and that's the one you would alter, right? So in this case, if the original Access query was this, and the new view is view test, what I would do is the new Access query, I would say select star from view test, right? View test, and then where customer ID, then where customer ID equal 100, right? So I would modify the query, that query in particular. So in this case, you would have a view. It would say view BW.
Well, I did try as well using a pass-through query, but I found that was slower. The form.
Because you're modifying the pass-through query and you're passing the results on to the SQL Server. I have done changes to the pass-through queries when it comes to reports. That's a common methodology, right? You create a pass-through query and you attach it to a report. So when the report executes, a report executes the pass-through query. And because you don't have to edit the data in the report, it's great. But if you wouldn't bind the form necessarily to a pass-through query because then you can't change the data. Edit data, 9 times out of 10, you're changing and editing data on the form. So pass-through query is a big no-no for editing data because you'd never be able to do it. So by definition, it's read-only. So I haven't particularly played around with modifying the pass-through query to see if it's faster or not. So I'm glad you told us about that observation you have there where modifying the pass-through query was actually slower than just creating another view doing that.
Yeah, I mean, it was
Now,
just used for a little
keep in
list
mind,
box. It was.
based on the client that you're using, yeah, for the list box. So keep in mind that the underlying technology you're using is going to affect performance. In this case, what technology are you using? Are you using Client 11 or ODBC and OLEDB?
Client 11.
Using Client 11, which is a great client. I have lots of clients using Client 11. If you're using an older version of Client 11, then you're probably not maximizing your performance. But the more newer the client, the more smarter it becomes, and interfacing between Access and SQL Server. So I always recommend people to use the latest drivers. And so in this case, what happens is you've got a view that's linked on SQL Server, and then you have a query that's based on that view. So when a query launches, right, it calls the view, and then the request goes to SQL Server with the word clause customer ID equal 100 in my case. It gets parsed on the server and comes back with that sub-result set. If there's any issue whatsoever between that communication between Access and the SQL Server just gives all the data to Access and says, here, you do the query. Because I don't understand what you're asking me for or what have you. So always good to avoid those situations. Sometimes you can't, and you have to use both a view and a query that's based off the view. Great question. Anybody else has a question, observation, comment, or criticism? Please look forward to this part of the presentation. We'll ask me things. All right. Well, look, this is my. Wait a second. We have a question here from Greg. What about TV table TVS? Can you explain what TVF is, Greg? Cambodia. Oh, table value functions. That's a more advanced topic. We'll be covering that next month. Table value functions are great in certain circumstances. If we use when it comes to a multi-tenant database, you do that. He's trying to call me. All right. Any other questions? All right. Well, this has been Juan Soto live from Chicago at Intermediate Academy. Join me next month for our Christmas edition, where we're going to talk about advanced topics in SQL Server. We might have a special guest to help us out with that topic. So long, everyone. Thank you very much. Have a great evening.